Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be talking about one specific state. It's going to be another one of those videos. We'll be focusing on New York, which is not a state that gets a lot of attention politically because it's been pretty solidly Democratic for the past 30 years. But now there have been some conversations about the future of New York politically, and I'll be weighing in today on my thoughts. And so broadly, given how well Donald Trump did here in 2020, losing it by less than 13%, it's important to think about whether or not New York is truly going to become a competitive state. If in 10 or 20 years, Republicans have a path to victory here and a path to victory that is realistic. Now, just to kind of talk about what we're dealing with, for those of you who don't remember, in 2020 in New York, Joe Biden won by a very solid 23%. So Kamala Harris did over 11% worse than Joe Biden. And this was just, again, I'll come back to this in a second, but that was just a 4-year difference, mind you. So in 4 years, New York got 11 points redder. And in the 2022 midterms, we saw kind of a similar thing, where in the gubernatorial election, Kathy Hochul, the Democrat, won by less than 7% statewide. So clearly, there's been a trend in New York, and since 2020, the state has shifted rapidly away from the Democratic Party. Now, I would say a big chunk of this could be attributed to turnout, which I'll be talking about in just 1 second, and again, how that will manifest in the future. But something you have to understand is that New York, I think, has been punching well above its weight for Democrats for many years now. And so let's get into what that actually means. So generally speaking, when we talk about demographics or fundamentals or, average results, right, we tend to think about how would the average election go given this population between the average Republican and the average Democrat. And so states like Florida, for example, were often, and this is less the case now than it was 4 or 5 years ago because Hispanic voters are rapidly trending towards Republicans. But just to talk about this kind of as if we were still in 2020 or 2019, an argument that Democrats often made was that Republicans were punching well above their weight in Florida because even though that state has a significant Hispanic population, actually as many counties that are majority or plurality Hispanic, Republicans still win it and still won it regularly, even back before 2020. Republicans win it by a lot more now, but even before 2020, Republicans were still winning more elections than not statewide in Florida. So, again, that's just one example. And I think the reverse of this could be Wisconsin, where Democrats do reasonably well, despite the fact that it's mostly rural, mostly white, and not particularly college educated. So, those are kind of examples of where the party's demographics do not line up with the way the state, or the state's demographics do not necessarily line up with the party that it votes for. Wisconsin and California, or Wisconsin and Massachusetts, voted for the same candidate in 2020, but they look very different. California in 2020, backed Biden by a lot more than Wisconsin, but both states backed Biden. California, very diverse, huge urban areas, again, very urban state in general. Massachusetts, also, quite an urban state, but very white, but very college educated. And so that is kind of, that goes to show how these three states, even though they voted the same way, behaved very differently and are made up of very different groups of people. So again, that's all to say that fundamentally, Democrats overperform in Wisconsin, they underperform in Florida, and in New York, they were overperforming for a while. And I actually see this 2020 performance by Biden as kind of the last hurrah. And that kind of gets into my overall, claim here, which is that New York is going to get redder, and it's going to keep getting redder. And that's simply because Democrats have done very well here as of late. I guess we're getting used to Democrats doing very well here, and it's not sustainable. And so when you look at the 2020 election in New York, you kind of get some signs here. Much of upstate New York trended towards Joe Biden. He did, well in most of these counties. He did especially well. I want to highlight Westchester County and Putnam County, as well as Dutchess County, and then you go to Ulster County, so kind of this central part of the state. I consider this to be upstate once you get into Ulster and Dutchess, not really Westchester, though. I know a lot of people have very strong opinions on that. But again, these are light blue counties, not Putnam, but Dutchess and Ulster, and to an extent Westchester, which is getting bluer. These are light blue counties where Democrats have done well. And they've done well because they've done better with college-educated white voters, especially in Ulster and Dutchess County. So, again, that is kind of those are the areas that swung the most towards Biden in 2020. But in the areas that swung most towards Trump in 2020 were the Bronx, or that's New Jersey, excuse me, Queens, Brooklyn, even go to Staten Island, which didn't even move at all, despite the fact that a lot of people expected Biden to do well there because of a competitive congressional race. And so the city itself of New York, and Manhattan moved the least, only moved about 2.5, but it still swung towards Trump. That's significant. The city swung towards Trump from 2016 to 2020. And that was especially prevalent in the Bronx, which is the most diverse, or not that diverse, I should say, but I think this is the least white borough in New York. It has a significant black population in specific, as well as Hispanic. And so I think these swings kind of showed us what was to come. And so now you look at 2024 and you see what happened, and Kamala Harris collapsed in New York, in New York City. And again, just to kind of go back to the just the presidential maps to kind of show the shift here, all of New York trended red, but look at how much bigger the arrows are in the city, right, than 22-point swing in the Bronx, right, than upstate, where you actually had a few counties swing towards Harris, and you had the average counties swung a little bit towards Trump, but not by like a ton. And so that, again, just to kind of reiterate here, I'll talk about 2012 in a second, but that shows you that even in 2024, as all of New York swung red, far and away the most drastic swings were in the city. And so that's kind of today's topic, which is that Democrats, as I told you, have punched above their weight in New York. That's because they've punched above their weight in the city. And so when we look at the Bronx, or when we look at Queens, which is, really, I think, interesting as a case study here, Democratic margins have just gotten crushed here in recent years. And if we go back to 2012, which was a really good year for Democrats with all voters of color, you can see this. In the Bronx, Mitt Romney got 8% of the vote. He got 8%. He got literally single digits. 12 years later, 2024, Trump's up to 27. Kamala Harris got 262,000 votes in the Bronx. Barack Obama got 288,000 votes. And mind you, 2024, I think 25 million more people voted in that election. So as turnout went up by a huge amount. We saw Kamala Harris get 22,000 votes less, or not 22,000, what am I saying? 26,000 votes less than Barack Obama. And so when you understand that, when you understand that Democrats are literally bleeding votes every election in areas like the Bronx, and I go to Queens too, Barack Obama got 79% of the vote there. Kamala Harris got 62% there. Harris got 437,000 votes. Obama got 399,000 votes. And again, this is a rapidly growing county. I think the better comparison is Romney to Trump. Romney got 103K. Trump got well past double that, 264K. So Democrats in the Bronx are just bleeding votes. And in Queens, credit Kamala Harris, she got 38,000 more votes than Barack Obama, despite the fact that Queens has grown. There's more voters there. And more importantly, her margin there has gone down because Donald Trump, way more than doubled Mitt Romney's vote total. And so Democrats in 2012, when you look at this coalition, this wasn't a coalition of, I would say, progressive voters. This was a coalition of black voters, Hispanic voters, and Asian voters, as well as some white voters, but the biggest losses for Democrats have been among voters of color. And these voters were not necessarily, progressive. I don't think that they came to vote for Barack Obama because they were progressive on social issues. 2012 was the first election in which the Democratic Party ran a candidate that was openly in favor of the legalization of gay marriage at the federal level, with Barack Obama coming out in support of that, not in 2008, but before 2012. And I don't think that's why he did well in New York City. I think he did well in New York City because he had appeal to these voters for other reasons, whether it was economic policy or just the fact that Barack Obama was a better communicator for the Democratic Party with these voters than we've seen from either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. But I think most of it is to blame on Joe Biden because he was the one who, was the president for the past 4 years and is kind of the face of the Democratic Party. And so that is what goes to show why Democrats have dropped in New York City. And when we talk about the future of New York City has kept New York deeply blue for a long time. And if you look at the 2020 election in New York, you can see that upstate's kind of a mix. There's some cities. It's not all rural. Whoops. Let's go back here. Here we go. There's some cities: Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Albany. There are certainly some cities that are going to stay blue. I would say, like even if they do trend a little bit to the right. But in 2020, Joe Biden won the upstate counties by around 3%, and he won New York City by I don't remember how much, but in the 30s, right? I think more than that, potentially in the 40s. And so Democrats, Kamala Harris lost upstate New York, but it doesn't matter what the margin in upstate New York is for Democrats as long as they keep winning New York City by 20, 30 points. And so I think 2028 and 2026, for the next few years, Democrats have enough room to fall, even from 2024, that they can still lose more in New York City than they can win, and they can win statewide, right? But going forward, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, this is not sustainable. Between 2012 and 2020, the Republicans increased their vote share in Queens by more than double. Just as an example, Trump 264K. What was Romney at? Let's remind ourselves, 103K. So Trump in that 12-year span got 161,000 more votes than Mitt Romney in one county, while Kamala Harris only gained 38,000 from Barack Obama. The Bronx, it's Democrats. Harris lost votes compared to Obama. Mitt Romney had 26,000. Donald Trump had 98,000. So again, you see another 70,000 vote increase, more than that. And so next year, 2026 and 2028, if that happens again, Democrats will still win New York. But again, we're going to get to a point where that's not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be because Democrats don't have the ability that Barack Obama did to win over voters who aren't necessarily socially progressive or socially liberal. I don't mean to say that because I think a lot of people say this to knock the Democratic Party. Oh, they can't appeal to voters who aren't socially left-wing, like they've abandoned these groups. I'm not framing it that way. I think that the Democratic Party's losses with these voters are very normal and very predictable and are a normal part of political trends that happen. The same way Republican losses with voters in the suburbs 4-6 years ago that are still happening today are a normal part of political trends. But the issue for Democrats in New York is that they punched well above their weight for so long with these voters who are not necessarily socially progressive, who are not necessarily, aligned with the goals of the Biden administration, and they're now paying the price for it. Again, in 2020, compared to 2024, Biden looks like he did incredibly well in New York City. But I remember back then when I talked about this 4 years ago, even back then, this was a bad performance. Even then, we saw a double-digit swing towards Donald Trump in the Bronx. And so at a certain point, it will become too much for Democrats. And I don't think that'll be next year. I don't think it'll be in 2028. But I do think in 10, 15 years, it's going to be the case. What matters in New York is New York City. And if Democrats keep losing there, they are going to lose New York as a whole, eventually. It'll probably be a governor's race first, then maybe a Senate race. And I think eventually, in 15, 20 years, New York could be competitive presidentially. Because again, we saw the Democratic margin in New York in 2024 halve from 2020. It went from 23 to 11, or from 23 to 13. So roughly half, a little more. Again, I don't think this is done. I think New York City has more to fall for Democrats because, again, Kamala Harris, it isn't like, she still got 73% of the vote in the Bronx. I think that vote can fall down more. She's still got 62 in Queens. I think that can fall more. There's always more room to fall until you stop it from happening. And so I think Democrats are going to have to deal with that going forward because these are 28 electoral votes that are really, really necessary for the Democrats to win the White House. This has been a key part of their coalition for decades, and they can't lose it. They simply can't unless something changes in a deeply Republican state, which could happen. So we'll see. All right, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you want to see from the channel next, and I will talk to you all later.